What's going on, everybody? I'm Tank, and today we're going to be having another conversation about stuff that goes on behind the scenes in the music industry, or more specifically, the live music industry. Now, our subject matter today is something that's been going on for years, decades even. I know for a fact that stuff like this has been happening since at least the 80s, and I'd be willing to guess it's been happening even longer than that. And even throughout that entire amount of time, people have fought it and complained about it, but it still remains a regular business practice in live music. Now, of course, I'm talking about pay to play, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's when a band pays to play a show. Now, normally with these videos, I usually take something that happened in recent events in the news with the music industry and kind of extrapolate on that. Now, I will say nothing's really happened recently. This isn't something that I saw online and decided to talk more about it. This is actually something that just started coming up quite frequently from you guys that view this channel and were asking more about it and my thoughts on it. So I decided this might be a good time to actually sit down and talk about this entire thing. Now, in this video, we're going to cover two major subject matters. The first of it is being that stereotypical pay-to-play situation, which is when usually it's a promoter or a venue that charges a band to play a show. And the other subject that we're going to cover is something quite similar but more accepted: Tour Buy-Ons, when a band will pay a large sum of money up front to be put on an entire tour. So stick around. Let's find out why some of these bands are willing to shell out their own money just to play a show. Now, while we're going to cover a lot of things on both of these topics, I think the biggest thing here that I saw a lot of you guys asking is this worth it? Is it worth it for bands to pay their own money to play shows? So hopefully we can try and answer some of those questions. But for the most part, I'm going to stay super just in my lane here. I'm not necessarily going to give out my opinion. I'm just going to give you my experiences, tell you how it works, and let you make your own opinion. So let's get started. Starting with the pay-to-play scenario, there are a handful of different situations that a band could run into that fall under this category of pay-to-play. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going to stick to the most common one, which is when a promoter or a venue, or in very rare cases, a headlining band, will charge an opening band for tickets up front and then make that band sell those tickets to make their money back. I would guess that 90 to 95% of the time a band is offered a pay-to-play, this is going to be the situation they're in. And this is the situation that my band was in almost every single time we were offered stuff like this. So let me just give you like a fictional scenario of something that would happen in a situation like this, just to kind of better explain how this kind of transaction would happen. Let's say a really big, well-known band is touring in North America, and their tour has two other bands with them on the entire thing, making it 3 bands total. In a lot of these cities, the promoters and venues are going to want to have an additional band, a 4th band on that show to open, sometimes maybe even a 5th. So what the promoters will do is reach out to a lot of these local bands in these individual cities and give them the opportunity to open on that tour. And, well, that tour stop rather, not the whole tour, just the city they're from. And what band doesn't want that? They want to be able to play in front of another crowd. They want to be able to say, hey, we opened for so-and-so. So if a band says, yes, we want to do it, which they most likely would, then the promoter is going to say, okay, so what's going to happen is I'm going to charge you $500 up front right now. And what that's going to do is give you 50 tickets, which you can then sell at $10 a piece, or really at that point, whatever you want. But if the ticket's $10, that's what you sell it for. You're going to take 50 tickets, sell them for $10 a piece to your fans, your friends, your family, whoever. And if you sell all 50, then you make your money back. But if the band doesn't sell all 50, then they're down for whatever amount of tickets they didn't sell. So if they sold 25 tickets, they've basically spent $250 to play this show with this nationally touring band. And this is extremely common. I mean, so common to the point when I was in a band years and years ago, my band didn't even question this when it came up. If there was a national show we wanted to play, we would just agree to the pay to play because that's just how we thought it was done. And it does go past the promoters as well. A lot of venues do this. Growing up in the Chicago scene, the Rave up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a very well-known venue, they did this a lot for their shows. If there were bands from Chicago or Milwaukee that wanted to open these shows, they would do that upfront charge for tickets. And it kind of almost became a joke and a meme in our community where every time a local band said, hey, we're doing a show up at the Rave opening for so-and-so, they're like, oh, how much did you pay for that? But on the promoter side of things, they're covered. They've already gotten money up front from the band. So even if that band doesn't sell any tickets at all, the promoter is still going to make their full amount of money. But with the bands, especially when you're dealing with local bands or startup bands, where is this money coming from? Because to any of you out there that have ever been in a band, you know that, especially in a local scene, you're not really making tons and tons and tons of money. A lot of the times with bands, all the financing is basically done from each individual member. So in my band situation, there were a lot of times where if we wanted to do a pay to play, each of us band members would just kick in $100 of our own money to front all of that. And that could be a big financial burden for a young band that doesn't have a ton of money. But the big question related to all of this that we already brought up earlier is this worth it? Is it worth it for a band to shell out money to get onto a show? And as I said, possibly, because it's all dependent on the value that band holds it to. I couldn't just tell a band in a situation if it's going to be worth it to them, because maybe the crowd that they're playing in front of, that they've paid to play in front of, really likes them. It could translate into merch sales. The bands on the tour could like them and they could make friends or they could make new contacts. And who knows, maybe there's a record label executive in the crowd that happens to see that band. But what I will say, in my experience, those kind of scenarios never really happen, man. Every single pay to play we've done, we're like, this is going to be sick and we're going to be seen by so many people and, these bands are going to love us. And it doesn't really happen. And a lot of the times it's because fans and bands know when there's a local support band on a tour package, it could be hit or miss. The band might be really good. The band may be inexperienced and may not be that good. Sometimes if they're opening right after the doors open, over half that crowd isn't going to see them play anyways. The other bands are busy doing stuff. They're probably not going to watch you play your show. So again, it's all dependent on the situation. It might be worth it, but it might not be. But that's all up to you and your band. Do you think paying $500 is going to be worth it to get on this show? What is it going to do for you in the long run? Are you going to create new fans? Are you going to make new contacts? It all depends. And let's say you're one of those bands that does pay the money to play on a show and you can sell all of those tickets to make your money back. At that point, if you can draw those people, why not just do your own show? And I guess, saying that out loud, it's probably because a lot of these bands want to play in front of somebody else's crowd. I know that's the reason we did it. But again, that just goes back to, what is this worth to you and your band? And can you financially handle that burden of paying up front to do a show? Now, at the end of the day, nobody's forcing these bands to do this. A band could easily say no if they wanted to. Now, I will say if they're in that situation where they think it's going to be very beneficial to them, they may not want to say no. And then it does suck to pay that upfront fee, especially if it's a band that's still building up and can't really financially handle it, but you could easily say no to these. I mean, my band, way back when we first started, we did tons of pay to plays. Some of them were worth it. A lot of them were not. But there are just as many that we said no to for many reasons. Maybe we just didn't trust the promoter. Maybe we didn't think our band would do good on the show. There are a lot of different things that go into this. If I had any advice for any bands, local bands or otherwise, that are given these situations, I'd say, really take a minute to discuss it amongst your band. Don't just jump all over it. Because while it does look cool on paper to say that you opened for a national band, you got to really think if you're going to fit and if it's going to be worth it. So make sure that you're trying to open for bands that you think your music will connect with their fans and that you'll fit with. And maybe on an off chance, you might get to know them. And maybe down the road, they might take you on another tour, because that has happened to me directly off of a pay-to-play. But moving along to the next part of our video, we're going to talk about Tour Buy-Ons. And Tour Buy-Ons are actually way more widely accepted in the music business. And it's actually really common amongst big signed bands as well. But for bands that aren't signed, or independent, or local bands that are hoping to get a big break, some of these tour buy-ons can wreak financial havoc on some of these bands if they're not careful with the way they do things. And with this specific situation, I'll give you an actual real example, because my band has done this in the past. So a booking agent for a band that we were friends with, that we knew and that we've played shows with, actually we met them from doing pay-to-plays years before, and one of those rare situations where it worked out and we got to know the band. Their agent reaches out and says, hey, they've got this tour coming up. There's 2 opening bands on it already, but we want to have another opening slot, and we wanted to know if you guys would do it. Well, of course, we got excited and said, yes, we would love to do this tour. But it came with strings attached. There was a tour buy-on. So they told us, because you guys are a local band and you're unsigned, there are other bands that have interest in this that are signed. So we're going to charge you a tour buy-on of $10,000 to get onto this tour, because there are other bands that will probably draw more than you guys will. So this is basically just covering us. Now that included tour marketing. We were on the tour passes. We were on the posters. We were a part of this tour, but it also came with no guarantee. We were not getting paid for the shows that we were playing, and we had to specifically rely on merchandise every single night. Now, we all got together and talked about this. Is this going to be worth it? Do we have 10 grand? And the quick answer to that was, fuck no, we don't. What local band has 10 grand just sitting around? Probably not a lot of them. So we got some of the money together, and full honesty, my dad actually loaned us the rest of it to get onto this tour. And we looked at the routing and we decided, hey, even if we break even just from selling merch, like, this might be worth it. We're going to get in front of big crowds every night. It's going to be crowds of, 1,500 to 2,000 people every night. We might get new fans. We might get seen by people. We might make friends with the other bands. We think it's worth it. So we got a hold of the agent again and said, hey, we've got the money. Let's do it. And he's like, oh, well, there's another band that actually is signed that told us they'd also pay us 10 grand. So if you can come up with 15 grand, we'll put you on this tour. I mean, it sounds nuts, right? Well, we came up with the rest of that money, thanks, Dad, and we bought onto that tour. Now, through the length of that tour, I will say it was awesome. We played awesome shows. We got to know all of the other bands, people that I'm still friends with to this day, and it was great. But financially, nah, dude, we didn't even get close to breaking even. We had things that happened on the road, expenses we weren't even planning for. We had a trailer break on us and had to buy a brand new trailer on the road. Our merch money just basically fed us and got us enough gas to get to the next venue. Now, in the long run, some of those other bands that were on that tour took us out on tour with them for, free or next to nothing tour buy-ons. So we did get more tours out of it. But it really is one of those situations where it's like, okay, we paid 15 grand to play a tour. What was worth it from that? What came out of that? Did we get signed? No. Did we get thrown on bigger tours? No. We did get other tours though. So looking back on it, I probably would have loved doing it again. But again, how much is the financial wreckage worth it to a band to do something like this? And I know a lot of people are probably thinking, well, where does that tour buy-on come from? Is it the band that specifically wants the money? Is it their management? Is it the agency? Is it a combination of all of it? And if I'm being 100% honest with you guys, I have no idea. I would like to think that the band wasn't solely involved for charging us, or maybe they thought we were gullible enough to pay 15 grand to open for them, even though we knew them very well. I really don't know the answer. But when you start getting into the realm of bigger signed bands doing Tour Buy-Ons, then that's where more of the actual business aspect of this comes in. So when a major tour goes out, like a big signed band goes out, they may have some Tour Buy-Ons available for that tour. And the rest of the labels are going to be aware of it. And then you start getting basically a bidding war. What label wants to get their up and coming or mid-level band on this tour the most? And these labels will throw the money out there to get these bands on there because they know that if they're playing these bigger shows like theaters, arenas, amphitheaters, there's going to be a lot more people, and those people are going to turn into record sales and streams and merch sales. And in the long run, it may be a very good thing for the band that they're really trying to promote. Now, this sounds great. A label is going to pay for their band to do a tour, right? Well, in the long run, that money is eventually going to come out of that band's pocket at some point. Dude, the days of tour support and like cash bonuses for signing with a label, that stuff is long gone. That disappeared when record sales started going way down. So if a label pays 50 grand to get one of their bands on a major tour, at some point the label is going to recuperate that money from that band, whether it's from merchandise sales or streaming profits or record sales or anything. That's why a lot of people in the reaction community don't want to take money from labels, even if they're offered it. And Nick Nocturnal says it perfectly. He said he will never take money from a label to do a reaction because at some point that's, marketing budget for the band. That money is going to come back out of the band's pocket at some point. So even though the labels are fronting this money for their bands, the bands still have the final say on this. And they really have to sit down and figure out, okay, is it worth it to do this tour where eventually we're going to be, having to pay 50 grand back to our record label? A lot of the times, yeah, probably worth it in this case, because if it's with a bigger band that's doing, thousands and thousands and thousands of people a night, you could probably easily translate that into new fans. But I have heard of situations where it basically hasn't worked out well for bands, and then they've been indebted to their record labels. And best case scenario for the band while they're on the actual tour, best case scenario is break even. A lot of these bands and their labels are aware that buying onto a tour like this isn't to make money. It's the same way when bands travel internationally, when bands from Europe come to the US, when bands from the US go to the rest of the world. They're not trying to make money. They're trying to make their fans happy. They're trying to do shows for their fans that usually don't see it. And that's kind of the same mentality with this. It's try and break even, try and gain as many new fans as possible. And we're not going to spend time on this, but there are situations where festivals charge bands to play as well, even on side stages and stuff like that. I've done very well in this video of not dropping any names, so I won't, but there are festivals that are notorious for charging a lot of bands, whether they're signed or not, just to play a 30-minute set in the middle of the day at their festival. But to wrap this up and kind of, conclude this here, anytime you're presented with a pay-to-play or a tour buy-on, it really does boil down to what you think it's going to be worth for your band in that situation. And in my experience, and from talking to a lot of people, sometimes your best case scenario really is just breaking even and being able to say that you did that tour, because sometimes these situations don't work out exactly the way a lot of these bands and labels are hoping that they will. But this is a very common thing in the music industry, and in my opinion, I don't think it's going anywhere, because we all know at this point, the music industry, just like any other industry, is just a money-making machine, man. As long as there's a way for people to make extra money in some fashion, it's gonna keep happening. So just be aware of all the situations. If you are in a band, don't get taken advantage of. If it's a situation where you think it is worth it, probably go for it. But if not, if you have any questions, probably just let that one go. But as always, if there are any more questions or anything anybody wants to add to this, feel free to comment below, because I know when I do these videos where I just let the camera run and kind of go, there's probably stuff that I'm going to miss, and that like 2 days later after finishing this video, I'm going to be like, oh, I should have said that. So if you have anything to add, have any questions, whatever, I love to keep these conversations going. Drop it in the comments. To everybody that's returning and that's a regular viewer, thank you so much for always checking out this content. If this is your first time checking out my channel, I release videos like this. I do a lot of reactions and a lot of other stuff. So if you want to join us for the ride, feel free to click subscribe. I'm also on a ton of different social media. I have a Discord server. I have a Twitch that I stream on pretty regularly where we play games and check out new music. So if you guys want to join us on those, I'll throw links in the description below. My handle on everything is @TankTheTech. Thank you guys so much for watching. Wherever you are in the world, be safe, be kind to each other, and I'll be back very soon with another video.